Bradstow has two newsagents. A month ago, the paperbacks most in demand were The Exorcist and David Niven's autobiography. This week, this book is outselling all the rest. Dr. Wilde may have tried to keep it secret, but the residents know whom the book is about. They're prepared to pay over $6 for an academic study in which nearly every page contains phrases like objective variables, stratification systems, and manifestations of core phenomena. But behind the jargon and the false names, the townspeople have recognised a true story about themselves and their community, a story spiced with gossip, innuendo, and downright character.
It's not the most difficult detective job to discover that Bradstow is about Bowral, this small country town about 80 miles south of Sydney and a few miles east of the Hume Highway. Not surprisingly, there are quite a few clues in the book itself, but the clincher is that everyone here knows the author because he lived here for over 2 years, interviewing people and gathering material. That was 4 years ago, and things have changed a bit since then. The town now has a new mayor and a new town clerk. But some things have remained the same. The businessmen who played such a prominent part in the running of Bradstow can be clearly identified in Bowral today. And there's still an elite group of landed gentry who live in luxurious homes on the outskirts of the town.
Dr. Wilde calls it the Grange. Its real name is Burradoo, and it's here that the members of Bowral's social elite live in material splendour. Millionaires' Row is the name the locals have given this street. Historically, the area was settled by wealthy graziers and Sydney businessmen who saw in Bowral's pleasant landscape and closeness to Sydney an ideal location for their country home. Tea on the veranda at 4:15, a pre-dinner scotch at 5:20, and a housekeeper who addresses the master of the house as Sir. Dr. Wilde says Bowral's landed gentry have tried to reproduce the ways of the English squirearchy to the point of aping an English public school accent. The inflation and death duties have put an end to the grand old days. These days, the landed gentry have airline pilots and local businessmen for neighbours, and very few households have full-time domestic help. Even so, the area remains a haven for retired, wealthy Sydney businessmen who have no local connections with Bowral. Is Bowral, then, not a typical Australian country town?
Let me say that you're assuming that the town I studied was Bowral. My book is called Bradstow, and nowhere have I indicated which town that is, and I don't intend to do so now. In terms of the typicality of Bradstow, Bradstow is not typical of country towns, but on the other hand, I don't know what a typical country town is.
With a population of nearly 7,000, Bowral is an important service centre for the surrounding dairy farms and beef cattle studs. Many of the smaller properties are owned by Pitt Street farmers, Sydney doctors and lawyers who use their properties as a hobby, a claim to social standing, and a source of tax relief. In the 1860s, the Governor of New South Wales and his wife arrived by special train to spend a week in Bowral. And ever since, the area has been a popular and prestigious tourist resort. Tourism stimulated local businesses, and it remains today an important aspect of the town's economic structure. If Bowral's social elite modelled themselves on the English squirearchy, then historical reasons aren't hard to find. This is Wingecarribee, a homestead built by convict labour on a hill overlooking the town. It's still owned today by the Oxley family, descendants of the explorer John Oxley, who was given a large land grant early last century. The homestead was transported from England in sections and still has its original furnishings. At the other end of Bowral's social spectrum are the workers. The brickworks is the largest single employer with a staff of 150. Dr. Wild estimates that the workers make up almost 40% of Bowral's population. Apart from the brickworks, the other major employers are the municipal council, a nearby cement factory and the local shops. The workers live in the town. Not for them the grassy lawns and brick mansions of Burradoo. Instead it's fibro, corrugated iron roofs and a tiny patch of withered grass. Mervyn Murchie is a contractor who's lived in Bowral all his life. He and his wife Maureen have 6 children. Does he think that there are big social divisions in Bowral?
Well, I'd say myself that it's divided into 2 different sections. There's the working class people, and then there's the Pitt Street farmers, let's put it that way, you know. Mainly made up of Sydney business people who have brought land and property here. And
What are they like as a group of people? Do you have much dealings with them?
well, a percentage of them are pretty good, and then there's another percentage of them which are a little bit classy, you know.
In what way?
Well, you go there and you look at them and they look at you and they think, well, he's not up to scratch, you know. He's not the type of fella that I want to associate with, you know.
Do you think the ordinary man gets much say in the way the town is run?
Well, I've lived here for 31 years, as I've already stated, and I've never ever had any say in the way how the town's run. But then again, you wouldn't expect me to have much say because I'm just an ordinary old labourer.
Still, in a democracy, one would expect that you'd have some sort of say or some sort of power over the town.
Well, you're not given the opportunity, are you? You're never asked to voice your opinion. You're never invited along to any sittings or anything like that to be able to voice your opinion. You've just got to get on to the member of the council who you think that can put your case forward and hope that he does the job for you.
Do you think it's right and proper that there should be this sort of division between social groups and social classes? Is that just nature, the way things have to go?
Well, it appears that way. It does appear that way. I've met quite a few people at Burradoo, right down from the would-bes to the millionaires. And you go and work for them and do a job for them, carry it out satisfactorily, and then run into them in the street and they just don't recognise you, you know, they don't know you.
Are they tough employers? Do they want their pound of flesh?
They want £2. They want £2 of flesh.
If all men are equal in the sight of God, then how the church views them in Bowral may be a different matter. Overwhelmingly white, Anglo-Saxon and Protestant, Bowral has a higher percentage of Anglicans than many other Australian communities.
We must stand up courageously for the things that do count.
According to Dr. Wilde, the Church of England has always commanded high social prestige in Bowral, and the gentry and their descendants have always contributed generously to it. When Dr. Wilde was writing his book, the then vicar at St Jude's told him that Bowral's elite were his type of people.
I declare the Finance and General Purposes Committee meeting open. Ladies and gentlemen, item 1.
Foursquare, austere, conservative. The architecture of Bowral Town Hall exemplifies the personalities of the aldermen who have run the town since its birth. A meeting of the town's finance committee drags on. Despite the fact that the meeting is open to the public, nobody has bothered to turn up. The meeting is chaired by the mayor, David Wood. He's a farmer who's lived in Bowral all his life. He's been an alderman for 9 years and stood unsuccessfully as a Liberal candidate in the last elections. It's no small tribute to Dr. Wilde that in the interests of scientific research, he managed to attend every meeting of Bowral Council in the 2 years he lived in the town. He concluded that the council was run by a small clique of businessmen who acted as a rubber stamp for decisions made by the mayor and the town clerk. But Dr. Wilde maintains that despite the nominal power held by the town's businessmen, it's still the landed gentry who retain effective control of the town. Surrounded by the homes of the gentry lies Bowral Golf Club. The locals call it the Royal Bowral. Membership of the club means you've made it. It's a haven for wealthy graziers, rich Sydney businessmen, lawyers, doctors, and the landed gentry of Bowral. Very few of Bowral's local businessmen belong to the golf club. It's a tradition that people who trade in the town are not invited to become members. According to Dr. Wilde, membership of the Bowral Golf Club bestows immediate prestige both within and outside the community. Mr. Douglas Hill Douglas is the president, and Mr. Max Allen the past president of the Bowral Golf Club.
And I think this is a club to be very, very proud of. It'll be 75 years old in June, and people have worked very hard for the club over the years, and they've been very generous to the club.
See, it's good exercise, and it's the company, you see, and as Max says, if you have people of comparable outlook and that, well, you can play with any of them. Enjoy your game, you sit down afterwards and have a natter away, tear everything to bits, you see. And, you know, as I say, we've just got comparable interests. Whereas a lot of the younger fellas, they haven't got the same, couldn't possibly have the same interests as we older retired people, you see.
Not that we don't enjoy talking to the young people.
Look, a lot of them come over here. We have open days, and they come here and they play in the course, and furthermore, they enjoy it too. And they're very welcome. But quite frankly, you see, we pay double the sub that they pay at the country club. Well, generally the young fellow, you know, he's paying off a house, or he's not long married, or he's got young children. It's an economic business, you see. All clubs are getting too expensive, and there's nothing worse than a rich man's club.
Is this a rich man's club?
No, it's not. But I say there is nothing worse than a rich man's club.
Why is that?
Well, the fact of having money is not sufficient.
What more is needed, do you think?
Oh, manners and a bit of personality and comparable interests with other people and that sort of thing.
Ted Springett isn't a member of the Bowral Golf Club. Not that he lacks manners or personality. His handicap is that he's in trade. Ted has been playing music here at Bowral's Craigieburn Hotel for the last 20 years. It's not that he needs the money. He's one of Bowral's richest men. He frankly admits it's an ego trip. Ted Springett likes an audience.
Can I show a trick with the Bowral money? We have here some Bowral money. We print this in Bowral. It's genuine Bowral money. Print it at our local press. They won't cash it anywhere else, but it's good money. Would you like to have a look at it? Please look at this money. Would you like to look at this money? It's local stuff. Would you like to see it? I hope you're looking at him and not me. Have anybody else got any more of my money? I'd hate you to waste this money. Is that money? Good. Look, you see, you do this, and we have one. It is incredible. So never mind. Well, somebody gave a shout us a drink.
Use some Bowral money, that's right.
The Springett family business is Bowral's biggest locally owned company. It started when Ted's father opened a grocery in the 1920s. Since then, it's grown to include a bakery, a shopping arcade, a soft drink factory, and other property interests. The showplace of the Springett business empire is the Hot Canary, a huge wholesale supermarket selling direct to the public. The supermarket says a lot about the Springett style of business. No credit is offered and customer service is minimal. But its low prices attract shoppers from as far away as Wollongong. The Springett business is run by 4 brothers, with Ted as first among equals. A survey in Dr. Wilde's book showed Ted Springett to be Bowral's second most influential person. It's Ted's brother Harry who topped the list of Bowral influentials. In fact, it's Harry who's the major figure of Dr. Wilde's book. He's a former mayor of Bowral, serving in that job longer than anyone else, and he's been active in local government for over 20 years.
This will offset some of our higher costs and rates.
Bob Springett manages the supermarket and, like Ted and Harry, is an active member of Bowral Rotary Club. Tony Springett used to run the soft drink factory until it was sold out to a national company. These days, he's a project builder.
I don't think that we have any influence at all. I think it's quite the opposite. If perhaps we're influential, as the book sometimes suggests, in community affairs where it has a wide range of consequences over the community as a whole, I think the fact that the 4 brothers who serve on such a wide sphere of activities in charitable affairs, then perhaps we do have some influence at these meetings, and if that's the case, perhaps we could be classed as influential. I wouldn't know. That's what others call us, not what we call ourselves.
How do you think other people in the town view you? Do you think you'd win any kind of popularity contest, or do you think there might be a little bit of opposition to you in town?
In managing this company, I know that the fact that we as brothers do make a lot of decisions inside the company, and there's also in public affairs, that the fact that we are instrumental in making these decisions, there is a conflict of opinion, and therefore we do tread on some people's corns, whether we do it unconsciously or not. There is a certain jealousy, and I know that this does affect us in business, and that there is a certain animosity towards the family.
Do you see big divisions in society here? Are there clear-cut divisions between wealthy people, poor people, townspeople, businessmen? Do you see those divisions yourself?
I don't think there's any divisions at all. We might have 1 or 2 people sticking out or making statements, and you feel that they might be a class above you, and the same thing, a class below you. But I don't think there's been any divisions here at all. It's been written up that there is a lot of class distinction. I haven't felt it.
Yet it is suggested that, for example, the people at Bradstow wouldn't have people in trade, as they say, in their golf club. Have you ever been made to feel that sort of class distinction?
Well, it's been said that often, and it has been practised on 1 or 2 occasions here. I know of people in trade that has been refused admission to the golf club. I was offered honorary membership while I was mayor, and that didn't suit. I've never made application to join the golf club because I was one of the person instrumental in forming the country clubs, and as a foundation member I can't see any reason being in 2 golf clubs, and I've never wanted to join Bowral Golf Club just for the class distinction.
The Springetts deny their political influence in Bowral, but there are at least 2 lasting monuments to their ability to get their own way. If the majority of aldermen had had their way, this park in the main street would have been named after a former town clerk. But Harry Springett, then an active member of the Lions Club, managed to convert enough aldermen to ensure that the Lions Club took the credit for the park. When plans were announced for the building of a TAB agency in Bowral, there was hostile reaction from church leaders. The council was evenly divided, but Harry Springett cast his deciding vote in favour of the TAB. He explained that this was what Bowral's business community wanted, and dismissed as unimportant the opposition of the churches.
Do you see any conflict of interest between, say, a family or a man who has strong business interests in the town taking an active part in local government?
No, I don't, really. It just so happens that at the time that this book was written, what was good for the Springetts was good for Bowral. And I think that the people that have the most say in the town have the most to gain or the most to do with the actions of the town should be represented on the council.
Nevertheless, surely from time to time it would lead to a conflict of interest, say a town planning matter, where the businessman, as a businessman, has certain interests, but perhaps as mayor and as alderman he has different interests.
Yes, that's quite true. But you must remember that he's not the only one on council. There are 9 on council, and the other 8 aren't just sitting there for the sake of it. They've got to express their opinion. No one man can dominate a council.
Do you care about Bowral as a town? Is it important to you in your life? Would you be concerned about, say, political developments, local political developments in Bowral? The question, say, of whether a building should be built out here or whether a quarry should go in somewhere, would that concern either of you?
My word, my very word. That's why I made the protest about the blasting of the quarry here, and I'm most concerned about the local development. I think they've made some grave mistakes here, and particularly in the building of a couple of motels which do not fit in with the landscape at all. And
is this something you think as Burradooites you'd have more say over than other people?
I'm not a Burradoo. I live over on the jib there.
No, the Burradooites got less say than anybody, because as a matter of principle, any suggestion we make is trodden on.
You don't think that your position in society gives you any stronger sway over what the council does?
It gives you less. It gives you less.
They're not interested in which street needs to be curbed and gutted next week. So they're quite happy to let the local businessman run local politics. But when it comes to a big issue, to an important issue, such as decentralisation, such as a new town plan, then their interests are at stake because they want to maintain the town as they know it. And it's on issues such as this, where the tone of the town could be transformed, that they come in and use their influence in order to obtain their desires.
How are they able to influence the businessmen? Why are the businessmen so prepared to listen to them under these circumstances?
In many ways, there is a deference paid to these people, and so their views are respected in some quarters. In other quarters, some of these people have contacts at a wider level than local government and can move things from outside the town.
You're suggesting what, contacts with important political figures in Sydney or in other centres?
That's right, and old school tie networks and so forth.
Col McPhedran runs a service station at the southern end of Bowral's main street. He's been an alderman for 9 years and is the only member of council to admit that he's a Labor Party supporter. Does he agree with Dr. Wilde's argument that it's the landed gentry who run Bowral?
Many years ago, perhaps, it might have been powerful when things were a little bit different, when the locals were employed by them, but at the moment the Burradooites consist of retired people who can't afford the labour that they could many years ago, you see. So consequently their power is not transmitted through their employees down into the running of the town.
So it's the businessmen who are powerful in Bowral today?
Yes.
How powerful are they? Can they? What sort of things can they do?
They're a very powerful mob. That's all I can say about that.
How important is the local council in the running of Bowral? How powerful is that?
I think in Bowral, being a small town, it's very important. It seems to be more important in Bowral than any other towns that I've been in.
Now, has everyone got free access to council, do you think, or is it one particular group that has always tended to dominate the council?
Well, my personal feelings when I first entered council 9 years ago was that the service clubs seemed to dominate the council. But then when we're talking about service clubs, we've got to remember that the members of the service clubs were also the local businessmen in the town, so...
It's all a bit incestuous, isn't it, in some ways? Everyone seems to be, doubling up in roles. Is that a bad thing, do you think?
I think so, yes. For the running of the town, I do. Yes.
While the landed gentry retreat to their exclusive golf club, Bowral's businessmen have their own private associations, the Lions Club, Apex and Rotary. Dr. Wilde says that membership of these clubs is obligatory for the local businessman who wants to get ahead. 3 of the 4 Springett brothers belong to Rotary and the 4th belongs to Lions. Dr. Wild suggests that these clubs are the main field of social interaction for the town's businessmen. Here, he says, local government policy is discussed and often decided, and business deals are made.
Improved, you got to those that were 6 foot by 7 foot.
The Rotary Club is a complete cross-section of the whole community, and in no way do we meet to make basic business deals or such like through the town itself.
I've been a member of this club for 18 years and I have never once heard a member discussing business in the sense that they're trying to make a deal or they're trying to influence any other member. I feel that it's purely a fellowship and a service club, and there's no sense that they're trying to gain power or that they are trying to influence other people to become involved in some activity that they're interested in.
Well, I would disagree, and just listening to the conversations that go on during the fellowship period, for example, before the meal or over the dinner table, one can hear local politics being discussed, what is going to arise at the next council meeting, and so on.
Is it fair to view them as exclusive clubs, or would they allow working class men in, for example, Rotary?
No, I think they are essentially elitist organisations. They're very careful as to who they're letting for membership. They seek out suitable members, and if an unsuitable one happens to creep in, well, processes are used to gradually ease him out.
While the gentry have their golf club and the businessmen their service clubs, the workers get together at the RSL, but not in Bowral. What is elsewhere a working man's club is in Bowral dominated by the gentry and businessmen. The workers are compelled to go to RSL clubs in neighbouring towns for social life and entertainment.
Why is it that the workers and tradesmen seem to play little interest in local politics in Bradstow?
Many of them are quite happy to leave the running of local politics to the wealthier businessmen. Many are just not concerned. Many have no interest at all, and they have no interest to protect either. So this can perhaps explain part of their lack of activity.
Is that, do you think, a common thing, or has it something to do with the nature of Bradstow?
It's partly due to the nature of Bradstow, in the fact that being a conservative town, and a town where deference patterns are quite marked, there is no organisation such as a Ratepayers Association or a Progress Association. In fact, the workers' groups and the tradesmen's groups are not organised to establish and to pursue their interests. But in other towns, Ratepayers Associations are quite active and are usually perhaps formed on a Labour Party base. This just doesn't happen in Bradstow.
Is it possible to draw any major conclusions about Australian society from a study like Bradstow? Is it, for example, possible to go so far as to say that we really don't live in an egalitarian society and that class is very important in Australia?
I think class and status are very important in Australia. I think in Australia, Australia generally is a much more heterogeneous society than is often given credit for. But the problem of generalising from Bradstow to Australia is, of course, a very difficult one indeed, and one that I wouldn't support, in the fact that Bradstow is a very special sort of town. Yet on the other hand, I think certain types of relationships, such as employer-employee relationships, which are discussed